today is the book launch, really, in celebration of the accomplishment and a great work that our colleague, Todd Cherches, has done, both for our department. He's teaching probably one of the most popular classes in the program in leadership and team building. Todd is the adjunct assistant professor. I already promoted you. Adjunct assistant professor since 2011, and consistently from that time on, so almost pushing into a 10th anniversary, Todd has been recognized for his excellence in teaching. He is a recipient, 3-time recipient of various awards that we have. Teaching Excellence Award twice. Most recent was this year, as well as Center for Academic Excellence Impact Award. He also runs his own consultancy and coaching practice, Big Blue Gumball. I would love to know why and where the name comes from. And Todd is a TEDx speaker. He is a sought after lecturer, and I know he's always on the road normally, so we're very lucky that we can get him at this time of sheltering, consulting with his clients all over the map and geography. So on this note, I mean, today we are celebrating the publishing of his book, Visual Leadership. Very catching title and the cover. Todd, I don't know if you were consulted on this, but definitely grabbing attention.
Thanks.
And what we're going to do, I am going to let Todd speak a little bit about, himself and then about the book. But I want to do the reminder on the ground rules. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat, and I will be monitoring them. And we will definitely have a Q&A at the end of this session, as well as we're going to remind you what other really exciting sessions are going to come up. So on this note, Todd, tell us a little bit about first yourself and how you got to write this book.
Sure. Thank you, Anna. Thank you for having me. And Stella, thank you so much. As I was saying before, I was carrying around this book in my head for 10 years. So to actually be able to carry it around physically is kind of surreal. And I got a shipment in, so you can see them all on the shelves behind me. So I'm not coming from a Barnes & Noble, although I am thinking about being a little coffee shop in my office. But so it's been a journey, as they say, and a team effort. And the book is filled with stories from my past, as well as models, metaphors, examples, things I teach in my classes at NYU and Columbia, things I use in my Big Blue Gumball training, coaching, practice. Long story short, some of you may have seen my TEDx talk that I did last year. I talk a little bit about how, as a kid, thinking about what I wanted to be when I grew up, I wanted to be Superman. So that was my dream and my backup, my fallback position. Being in the HR field, you always have to talk about your backup in your career path. My backup was to be Batman. So after that, I had no idea what I wanted to do. But someone said to me recently, you're kind of in a way a combination of Superman and Batman. Only instead of X-ray vision, your superpower is visual thinking and seeing things in a visual way. And my Batman utility belt is filled with all my visual thinking and visual leadership tools, tips, and techniques. So in a way, I'm trying to save the world through visual thinking and visual communication. So in that way, my vision has become a reality. So we're going to talk a little bit about, this is part interview, part book launch, but I also want it to be a discussion, interactive, experiential discussion. So I have a few slides I want to show you, some samples. I've been speaking a lot lately on visual leadership in the age of COVID. In fact, here's my COVID model right here that I dreaded. So this is something that, it's invisible until you make it visible, right? So how do you make the invisible visible so that you can make it real, and then you can help to make your vision a reality? And one of my catchphrases is I see what you're saying. So regardless of what we do, this is about in teaching, in business, and in life, we all are trying to get others to see what we're saying, right? So how do you get people to see things from our perspective? And one of the things I've been talking about recently is, from a leadership perspective, we often talk about communicating our vision and getting it out there into the world. But I think in this day and age, it's as important as ever to flip the eye around and see things from other people's point of view, right? In the world of diversity, inclusion, belonging, equity, we really need to look at things with empathy, with compassion, and see things, experience what other people are experiencing. And that's the other component of the eye. So it's kind of the way we have two eyes. So if you use one eye for, seeing your vision, but use the other eye to see what other people are saying, again, together, we'll make the world a better place. So those are just a few thoughts. just to kick us off. So I just want to show you a few things. So why visual leadership? I actually got the trademark. It took a couple of years and 3 times, 2 rejections before the US Patent Office finally gave me the trademark on the word visual leadership as it's spelled. The first 2 times they considered it too generic, and then they approved it as a registered trademark and brand, which is kind of cool. So visual leadership basically is the merging of visual thinking and leadership. There's a million books on leadership out there, and I've read many of them, as you can see from my bookshelf behind me. I'm a book addict. In fact, I used to work for the American Management Association, and in 1998, I started reading management books obsessively, and I averaged 1 a week over 20 years from 1998 to 2018 when I started really thinking about writing my book instead of reading other people's books. So I read over 1,000 management leadership books over the last 20 plus years. So there's a million leadership books, and visual thinking and design thinking are some of the hot topics out there. So what hit me from my background is when you merge the 2 together, it's a whole kind of different way of looking at leadership. And it's about, again, when you ask people what words come to mind when you think about leadership, the word vision is one of the first comes to mind, right? I have, Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech is about his vision of an idealized future state, right? So we always talk about vision and how you execute that vision to change the world. One way is through how we see things visually, and then how do we communicate more visually going forward. So what is visual thinking? In a nutshell, it's basically thinking in pictures. So we do a lot now in our programs around data analytics, right? In the human capital management program, we think in numbers, we think in words. This is about thinking in pictures. This is about thinking in visuals. I'm going to talk about the 4 different ways that I talk about doing this. So thinking in pictures, if you think about it, you have an idea, right? You need to think about how are you going to frame this idea? How are you going to frame it? How are you going to basically present it to other people to get that idea out of your mind and into someone else's? Shakespeare and Hamlet. I was an English literature major as an undergraduate, by the way. So I often incorporate Shakespeare and poetry into what I do. Shakespeare popularized the phrase mind's eye, to see something in your mind's eye, as Hamlet saw the ghost of his father in his mind's eye, right? How do you get something from your mind's eye into someone else's mind's eye so that they can say, yes, I see what you're saying, right? So whether we're instructors talking to our students, whether you're students talking to fellow students or to your instructors in the workplace and in life, it's all about getting other people to see what we're saying, to hear what we're saying, to feel what we're feeling, right? Getting ideas up there in the world from our mind into someone else's. And as I was going through some old textbooks from college, I stumbled across this one from one of my communications classes called Bridges, Not Walls. And if you think about the metaphor there, right, you could take bricks and stones and you could build a bridge which connects us, or you could put up a wall that divides us, right? So just right here from like 30 plus years ago, this book talked about this metaphor of bridges and walls as it relates to communication. So why visuals? I talk about this in my TED Talk. I break it down to these 3 ways: attention, comprehension, and retention, and they kind of rhyme. When you use visuals, and that could be pictures or it could be visual language, it gets people's attention. Like right now, everyone on the Zoom call is looking at this slide, right? So I have your attention, unless you're checking your phone or checking email or doing other things, right? Hopefully you have your attention and you're focused. I'm sure your eye is drawn to the picture, right? Are you looking at the text? You're looking at the picture. Our tendency is our eyes are drawn to the picture. That's just the way our brains are wired. Secondly, comprehension. When you use visuals and visual language, it increases understanding, right? If you look at a map, someone can explain to you verbally how to get from point A to point B, or they can show you a map, right? And you say, okay, I get it, because I can see it now. And then retention, the way our brain is wired, visuals help us to remember. So they aid in recall, memory, and ultimately in usage, when we can retrieve that knowledge when we need it in the future, right? So that's just 3 reasons why visuals are so impactful and why I focus so much on visual thinking. So here's a real life example. This is the suggested book list for my class that Anna was just talking about, my leadership and team building class, right? Which is going to get you to want to read and read these books, this or this, right? This is the same exact information. Like, you don't need the ISBN number, right? At the time, you don't need the price. What you need is, what does this book look like? What's the title? Which ones grab my attention, right? So I'm sure everyone's looking towards the right, towards the visuals rather than to the text. Again, that's just the way our brains are wired. So it'll help us draw our attention, understand, and to remember. So if you think about metaphorically, our left brain and right brain, they're always battling things out, and the right brain, the way it's wired, always wins. And I could just spend all day just watching this and to see if the winner changes at all, but it's always the right brain. And there are 2 reasons, without getting into all the brain science, 2 of the concepts associated here are the picture superiority effect and dual coding theory. So in brief, picture superiority effect just says, in fact, I'm going to turn this off because I'm sure it's distracting because it's visual. The picture superiority effect says that when we have text and we have visuals, our eyes are drawn and our memory is drawn to the visuals. That's why pictures are superior to text or text alone. Secondly, dual coding theory is when we use both sides of the brain, left brain and right brain. We're going to understand things better, and it's going to help us remember. That's the dual coding part. It gets coded in both parts of the brain as opposed to just one or the other. And you could Google both of those and do a lot of research, but that's just the foundation of some of that. So that's why picture is worth 1,000 words. Napoleon said a good sketch is better than a long speech. Confucius said that hearing something 1,000 times is not better than seeing it once. So again, this has been going on forever, the power of pictures. And if you think about it, cave drawings from 40,000 years ago were the ancient equivalent of today's emojis, right? So we've been using visuals for all of human history to communicate ideas. And cave drawings existed before the written word even existed. So, Anna, I just want to start right there and just get people's thoughts before I give you the 4 types of visual thinking. Do you have questions? Anyone else have questions? What are you thinking right now? Either you could turn your mic on or just want to hit the pause button for a second and just see what people are thinking. Anna, you're on mute.
Yeah. People are processing right now and visualizing what you have to bring in. And I know that in the end, you are going to, and you already just illustrated in how you present and your even syllabus, right? And that is actually the case. You know, there are some, we all know, some of you are instructors here, and I know that for Todd's class, he actually does give his students all visuals. And the effect of that, I think, and that's how you kind of make an introduction, an entry point to your class, inviting people to come in. And what's really amazing there, because we know that we have very diverse audiences. Our students come from all over the world at NYU, and it's amazing to see how unifying this visualization approach to even something as mundane as syllabus could be. And so as you go along, Todd, if you could just continue to point out those ways in which the reaction, the inclusion aspect of visualization rather than saying something or writing something is important to us.
Okay, great. Thanks, Anna.
And I know there are a couple of comments here. So Peter is saying he's thinking of how to apply it to his stats class, and Michael Valentine is saying, are there certain types of images that are more impactful on human thinking than others?
Okay, very great. So let's hold those questions towards the end, but just in terms of, as you were talking about my class, a lot of instructors start, welcome to session 1, let's talk about the syllabus, right? That's the expected. So what I do, I co-teach with Jeff Schwartzman, we open with a pop quiz. The very first things I say to my students are, hi, welcome to the class, put your books and devices away. I hope you studied for today's pop quiz. This counts for 50% of your final grade. And all of a sudden, that's the very first thing students hear when they walk in the door or within 2 minutes of starting the class, and they have to do a fill in the blanks, almost like a Mad Libs leadership quotes sheet. I have 20 quotes. They have to fill in the blanks on their own, and then they ring the bell, and then they have to pair up with a partner, and then they have to pair up with another group, and all of a sudden, they went from a solo activity to a partnership to a group of 4 within the first 7 minutes of the class. And right then, it sets the tone like, this is going to be different. This is not going to be, let me just walk you through the syllabus. Then, when I reveal the answers, I actually do it like a game show. I have a bell and a buzzer. The buzzer I stole from my wife's taboo game. But I use a bell and a buzzer, and when students get the wrong answer, I buzz it, and when they get the right answer, I ring it. It's like the game show. It creates this frantic pace, and it's interactive. And again, it says this is not, expect the unexpected in this class. It sets that tone from the very first thing. And as I walk them through the answers, it's all visual. It's all the quotes. And this was interesting. This was a real life lesson. I had all these quotes on this list. And then when I created the visual version of it, I realized that all the quotes were by middle-aged white males. Right? These were all famous quotes, JFK and Abe Lincoln and Henry Ford, like all the people we always quote. But it wasn't until I put the visuals of all the faces up there on the screen that it hit me. And actually, one of my students actually said that to me, it's not very diverse. So I immediately that night went home. I replaced half the quotes with a mix of people like Ken Chanel from American Express and Indra Nooyi from Pepsi and Ursula Burns from Xerox. So I incorporated a lot of diversity, and I read it the next time. And it was like, 1, they appreciated the responsiveness, and 2, it just opened my eyes to the fact that, that was an innocent thing on my part. It wasn't intentional, but a lot of times, again, this is part of what's going on in the world right now. We just do things again, innocently, but if it's not on our radar, we don't even realize it. So that was a real life example to me. I need to be aware of cultural diversity in all its forms. And again, so I basically revamped an entire exercise based on that, and gets a much better reaction than it used to. So that's just one example of how the power of visuals, I learned something from the visuals that until I saw it visually, I didn't recognize it, right? So, and then my students recognized it as well. So let me just get back to the last few slides just to walk through some of the other concepts, and then we'll talk about how, again, how we could use this in teaching and in business and in life. So the 4 types of visual thinking, I break it down into these categories, and I do this in my book as well. So category 1 is the use of visual imagery and pictures and drawings. In my classes, if I have a model, like picture picture SWOT, now SWOT 4-box matrix, like the SWOT or the time management matrix. There's a million matrices out there, right? Instead of just showing the slide, I actually have my students draw it. So in my classes, students actually are told to leave your laptops at home or under your desk and bring pad and paper with you, because there's drawing in almost every class. So if we're talking about a model, they actually draw it out. And as I reveal the model on the screen, they draw it along with them. They often make it, again, like a game, they fill in the blanks of the model, and by the time we get to the end, they've constructed it, right? Nagar and I did a workshop on different learning modalities, including VARC, visual, auditory, I see Nagar on the call, visual, auditory, reading and writing, and kinesthetic, right? So when you have students actually participate and engage and draw, they're using visual thinking by seeing it, auditory, we're talking about it, reading and writing, they're actually drawing it, and kinesthetic, and moving around and drawing activates the other side of your brain. So just having your students draw in your class will basically leverage 4 different learning modalities. So when you use visual imagery, pictures, and drawing, that's category 1. Mental models and frameworks. So again, there's a million models. There's, you know, Simon Sinek's start with why, right? Why, how, and what. There's, you know, time management matrix. There's 5 levels of listening. There's a million different models that we use out there. So when we use models and frameworks, again, it helps us to take the complexity and the messiness of life, put them in, you know, we always talk about thinking outside the box. I talk about thinking inside the box, right? You create a model, which is basically like a box. You take the messy complexity of life, put it in the box so you can see it more clearly visually. And then when you take it out of the box, then you see possibilities that maybe you didn't envision before that, right? So that's the second category. Thirdly, metaphors and analogies. Saying one thing is like something else is a great way to bring something to life and to explain something, if the metaphors and analogies are relevant to the person, right? So I'm a big baseball fan, so I tend to use a lot of baseball analogies and baseball stories, but if some of my students are 25-year-old females from China, a story about Derek Jeter may not exactly resonate with them, right? So what are some more universal metaphors we can use? Nature analogies, or dance, or theater, or the arts. You know, there are other things that are more universal that will cross cultural lines and all different, you know, in a diverse kind of way, appeal to multiple people. So being aware of the metaphors and analogies we use. So effective metaphors connect people and make things clear. The wrong metaphors can actually backfire on us. And a real life example of that is if you say to a student, you know, you sound like a, you know, I'm sounding like a broken record, right? One of my students thought that was like a good thing because it was like you broke an Olympic record, like you just won a gold medal. Those baby boomers of us who know what it's like to listen to a record album and know what it's like to hear that needle get stuck in the groove, know what it means to sound like a broken record, meaning I'm repeating myself. They took it a completely different way, right? So even the analogies we use, thinking about our, you know, what generation we're part of, so there's a million examples of that. I once mentioned, I once asked a question and no one was responding, and I said, it sounds like Sound of Silence in here. And I said, does anyone know the song Sound of Silence? And yeah, I mentioned Simon and Garfunkel. They thought that was a law firm or a consulting firm. There's no name recognition there. So again, we need to update our references. I use too many Seinfeld references and too many baseball analogies. So I know that I need to modify that to, again, meet our students where they live. And the fourth category is storytelling, and I also add humor. So whenever you can tell stories, it's just a great way to bring things to life. Stories humanize us, they connect us. In my class on management and leadership, and I tell people about, my students, about the worst bosses I've ever had, including the boss who threw a box of pens at my head. I write about that in my book because they were the wrong ones. So instead of just saying, hey, Todd, these are the wrong pens, she literally opened the door and threw the box of pens, and it missed my head by like a few inches. So I was working for one of the TV networks at the time out in LA. I won't mention which one. That has a C, a B, and an S in its name. But anyway, so I was working for this psycho crazy boss. My students love hearing those horror stories because, again, it humanizes us as professors, because a lot of our students put us on pedestals and think we were born as professors and it was anything but the truth. You know, I talk fast and loud because I'm from New York. I'm an extreme introvert, bookworm, wallflower, back of the room, behind the scenes kind of guy. So it kind of is inspirational to the students to know that, hey, I went from that to this, and it gives other people hope as well. So our stories, telling people about the worst mistakes we made and the times we were fired. I was fired twice and laid off a number of times. Students love those stories because, again, it makes us human. So those are the 4 categories. And here's one example that kind of illustrates all 4 in one picture, right? If you've seen this movie, which again, a lot of our millennial students have not, but even without that, I asked them, first of all, to fill in the blank of what the rest of the quote is, right? In what ways is life like a box of chocolates, even if you've never heard that quote before, right? Because you never know what you're going to get. So Forrest Gump, here's a visual image, so I'm using a picture. Our mental model is we reflect back on the movie, right? We have a model of that movie in our head. So when you're playing a movie in your head, you have a model of, all right, where does the scene take place? What was going on here? That's our model. The metaphor is, of course, right there, the box of chocolates. And then you could say, in what ways is life like a box of chocolate? In what ways is it, we never know what we're going to get? And lastly, the stories. Forrest Gump, the whole movie was about the stories that he told to people. And here I am telling you the story about Forrest Gump. So right here, with one image, I'm illustrating all 4 of these different ways of using visual thinking or viewing visual thinking. I want to give a few last things before we open up to conversation. Some real world examples. I've been asked to speak a lot lately on visual leadership in the age of COVID, right? So again, this disgusting molecule that has ruined everyone's life, right, in many ways, personally and professionally and economically, right? When you see this molecule and how disgusting it is, it basically brings it to life, right? So this is something that's invisible, and yet it's impacting us in so many ways. Another quote related to being invisible is that if you can see the invisible, you can do the impossible. So here's an invisible molecule that's invisible to the naked eye without this magnifying microscope, right? How it's impacting our life. And another way of thinking about invisibility is that if you can have a vision and dream and you can make that real, you can change the world, right? So there's different ways you can think about being visible and invisible. We're all familiar with this. This is both so even if you have no background in virology or statistics or anything else, flatten the curve has become part of our vernacular, right? So if we can flatten the curve, if we can wear masks and socially distance, we will not overwhelm our healthcare system. And this is how and why, right? So we all carry around this mental model in our heads. And again, this is just one visual example of how this is part of our everyday language now. Andrew Cuomo is a master of those 4 techniques. He tells stories that humanize him. He uses visuals like this. This was from a few months ago when we were just at the mountaintop. Now we're at the very bottom of that slope. He talked about metaphorically how if we don't socially distance, it's going to sweep over us and drown us like a tidal wave. They visually demonstrated the distancing from how they were sitting in the press conferences. Right here, just like with my book list, where's your eye drawn and which is more effective? The one on the right with pictures or the text on the left? The one on the left, I do a lot of faculty observation. That's part of my job outside of teaching. And so many of us are using slides that look like the one on the left. Bullet point, reading off the screen, instead of transferring our slides and our content into something more visual and more effective like the one on the right. So that's one tip also. How can you get rid of the death by bullet point thing and start using visuals more effectively to communicate ideas? Right here, there's no words on this, right? But here you're showing what to do and what not to do. That red circle with the line through it has universally become known as the do not do this symbol, right? So right here, message being communicated 100% visually. Right here, we have all this clutter, right? We're trying to flatten the curve. We're trying to stay socially distanced. But how far is 6 feet? Well, 6 feet is about the length of skis, right? So if you're standing next to someone, you could say, am I about the length of skis from this person, right? 6 feet as the number is so ambiguous and abstract, but if you say it's like the length of skis, you're using an analogy to communicate an idea that will change behavior. So I just got a very simple example of that. And Dr. Fauci is great as a storyteller. And one of the analogies and metaphors he always uses is this one, right? The pandemic, it will not be like flipping a switch. It'll be more like a dimmer. And think about that metaphor. In what ways, right? It's not like, okay, pandemic. Okay, it's over. We're back on track, right? It's going to be more like a dimmer. We're going to dial it up, but we also may have to dial it back, right? We need to constantly be calibrating. So just this metaphor that he uses has become part of our language as well, right? So perfect example of using metaphor, visual, and visual storytelling to communicate an idea. So with that, I'm going to unshare my screen. Those were some examples. And now let's just make it a conversation and talk about how we could use this stuff in real life.
All right, excellent. And also the energy level, in addition to the visuals, I could just sense the drive, you know, the commitment and the passion, which also brings attention to your message, right? You know, somebody on Galaxy A10e sent a message here with a very good point. That is, what are the examples that you can tell us or share where visuals are actually doing the opposite? They're not effective. They may be too superficial. There are some deep issues that we need to address, but you know, we have sort of this showmanship. Let's show the slides, etc., and that kind of takes away the deep thinking. So what are the pros and cons? You've talked about the pros. What are the cons of overdoing visualizations?
Yeah, sometimes it could be, you know, it's like all the metaphors, sizzle versus the steak, or bells and whistles, or you know, smoke and mirrors, right? Sometimes visuals could be used to abstract, to confuse. The wrong visual is worse than no visual, right? If you show a visual that's confusing or manipulative or untrue. In today's, you know, in the old days, you know, there were sayings like, you know, pictures don't lie. But now with Photoshop and deep fakes and everything else, you can't always believe what you know, we used to say seeing is believing, right? You can't always believe what you see. So we need to be visually literate. We need to be more visually critical of what we see and say, is this true? What's the source? Sometimes pictures can be used, again, to manipulate, and like anything else, whether it's in the news or business or whatever, advertising, right? They use visuals all the time. So yeah, I think it's about authenticity, credibility, honesty. We really, again, visuals is just one way of communicating a message, right? So Michael Diamond and I have talked about that, you know, how it relates to marketing and advertising, and he recommended a book to me called Design is Storytelling. So how we tell stories, how we design things from a user experience perspective, these are just things we need to think about. What do I use visuals? How many visuals? So it's really about the right visuals in the right place at the right time with the right people. So there's no one size fits all answer for anything, but I think we just need to think very critically about how we're using visuals and what our purpose is.
Purpose and responsibility also for the right, right images. The question that Jack is asking here is about the applications of visual leadership in the business when you're managing people. So how does that show up, and what are the good examples of using visual leadership like that?
Yeah, I mean, there's a million of them. For example, you know, an organizational chart, right? An org chart is a visual representation of who does what and who reports to whom, right? So you can say, you know, Martin runs things, and then there's Nagar, and then Anna, and then there's us, right? So you could basically explain it, or you can show us an org chart of what, you know, DPB, SPS, and DPB looks like, and then you can say, okay, now you can see how everyone's connected. So that's one example, you know, org charts in business, using charts and graphs and mind mapping. For example, let's say you're in a meeting. Do you have the confidence and the skills to get up at a flip chart or a whiteboard and say, let's sketch this out. Let's sketch out a process diagram, or grab a napkin and do a napkin sketch. There's a book called Back of the Napkin by Dan Rome, who popularized napkin sketching in the world of business, right? How can we use, again, visuals and visual storytelling effectively, right? So even without drawing or without a visual picture, you can still paint a picture with words, right? So the stories you tell, the language you use, those are all examples of using visuals in business, right? So we use them in marketing, we use them in, one of the exercises we do in my class as a real life example. So I teach in the HR program, right? Human capital management. When we talk about communication, we say, all right, you're an HR person. How do you communicate need to marketing, to finance, to your C-suite, to, you know, technology, right? If you're using jargon and acronyms that are HR focused, you're just alienating people. So what's an analogy or metaphor you could use, or a story you could tell to get them to fund your HRIS? And if you're not in HR, you may say, what is an HRIS, right? HR information system. How do you cross cultural barriers and boundaries of other departments? That's a big part of communication. If you could come up with a visual or a picture, you know, paint me a picture of what you need, and then let's look at it and talk about it. So those are just off the top of my head a few examples of using, again, visual representation. So if you think about an IKEA catalog, right, there's very few words, right? It's basically, here's a picture of all the pieces, here's how you assemble it. And so we use them all the time without really thinking about it. So hopefully this will make people more aware and more strategic about how visuals are already being used, and then how you can use them more strategically in business and life and in your teaching.
Thank you, Todd. Martin actually is in the audience, and he's got a question.
Hi, Martin.
Hey, Todd. Just know we at DPP are very proud of you and the great work you're doing. Now, I think we all want to be thought leaders and develop concepts that have an impact on industry, and you've clearly done that with visual leadership. Now, in the traditional academic world, you would demonstrate thought leadership by writing papers in journals that nobody has heard of. Now, if we apply your visual leadership concept to academia, how can faculty at SBS be these thought leaders and bringing their thoughts to the world with visual leadership?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the things. I mean, there's this paradigm of academia needs to be, use big words, needs to be boring to some extent, needs to be very research-based. So we could do all those things, but can we incorporate visuals? In some ways, people may be resistant. People and more traditional thinkers may say, "What is this?" Like, here's a real life example. This is a copy of my visual bio. So this is my entire resume in visual format. So you can see it goes from my New York jobs to my LA years up to the present. I know it's hard to see, but when I used to go on interviews and I would leave this behind, people would say, "What is this?" Right? So they're used to seeing resumes in the traditional format. This does not replace that, but it supplements it. And people always gravitate towards this because it uses logos, it uses colors. So that's one of the challenges, is how do you incorporate visuals into traditional media, like old stodgy academic journals? Are they going to be open and receptive to visuals? I think there's a movement now in the world, with design thinking becoming more and more popular, of using design thinking for non-designers, design thinking for business people and for the academic world. So I think there's a shift happening, and especially now that we're online more, millennials are much more attuned to visual thinking than us baby boomers were, again. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here to shake things up, especially now that we're all working from home. We're all looking at each other's faces, for example, right? So there's no, on this, on Zoom. So again, it's about the visual representation of data, right? It's about, different ways of getting people to see what you're saying in non-traditional ways. So I think it's going to take a while, but I think there's a shift. I'd love to hear Michael Diamond's thoughts. I see Michael on the call. What are some of your thoughts, or what are you seeing from a marketing perspective of visual thinking kind of into, being integrated into what you're doing?
Well, I want to share my compliments for your wonderful book, Todd. I think I got one of the first copies off of the press, but yeah, no, I think one of the areas you see it really effective is in the translation of complex ideas. So more and more, the things we need to communicate with each other tend to be quite complex, and especially when it comes to data, because of the plethora of data and the dimensions of data. So we're seeing that as much in data analytics, I guess, as marketing itself. But and in marketing or advertising, at least, has always been a visual medium. So I think there's probably as many lessons for your work and our work as teachers to draw from, good advertising as any probably discipline outside of graphic arts or something like that. Yeah, no, I think it's tremendous. I really applaud you for sort of trying to define it as a new movement, and I think it'll have a lot of support among academics and business people generally. So.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it.
Todd,
Yeah.
we have a question from Raya. Raya?
Hi, Raya.
Hi, Todd. Thank you for doing this. I was very excited, and I'm still very excited.
Great to see you.
Good to see you. The question I have is, so I work for a management consulting firm, and as you know, we live and die by our very dense PowerPoint presentations with lots of words and very few visuals, because apparently that looks to be very professional.
Yeah.
And so one of my roles in the organization is doing OD work for the firm. And so a part of that is the learning and development space. I'm trying to integrate more this idea that, what you and I have talked about around, let's be very simple on our slides. Let's use visuals as much as possible in very limited words. And the pushback that I'm getting is that pictures are subject to subjectivity, and we want to give people facts and be very objective with what we're trying to say. So how do you overcome something like that?
Well, to me, there's subjectivity in words also, words and numbers, right? And one of the things that I always say is, like, numbers have no meaning except for the context and the story that they tell, right? One of the chapters in my book is called How My Cardiologist Almost Gave Me a Heart Attack. Basically, I went through all these procedures and tests and everything, and my cardiologist, not my regular one, the substitute one, came in and said, well, based on your numbers, you have about a 5% chance of having a heart attack within the next 10 years. And I almost fainted. I got weak in my knees. I said, wait a minute, doesn't that mean I have a 95% chance that I won't? He said, yeah, that's another way of looking at it. I'm like, yeah. So again, he was just looking at numbers just, you know, factually, but he wasn't thinking about who's my audience and what's my message. The message should have been is, hey, that's 5% is normal for a 50-year-old male, right? So you're actually in great shape, but the message as he delivered it was totally the opposite of his intention, right? Another example, if I say I have a 250 average, right? What does that mean? With no context, it means nothing. If that's my baseball batting average, that's not very good. If it's my bowling average, it's great. I should join the Pro Bowlers Tour, right? So that 250 number is meaningless. And the classic example is Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs, when he announced the iPod, he could have said, this holds 5 gigabytes of data, or he could have said, as he did, this holds 1,000 songs in your pocket, right? 5 gigs means nothing to someone who doesn't have a tech background. To say, I could carry around 1,000 songs on that little device is amazing, right? So we need to think about the message we're delivering. And so words and numbers are no more credible than the visual image. So what I would say, it's not either or, but it's both. So I would say, here's the visuals, and here's the data to back it up, and here's the text to go along with it. So it's not one or the other, just like I wouldn't walk in with that visual resume and say, oh, I don't have a regular resume. You need both, right? So I would say it's not either or, but it's both. And visuals is just one other way. And we talk about DISC and social styles and Myers-Briggs. We all have different styles. Some people like the pictures, and some people like the numbers, and some people like a lot of detail, and some people like the big picture. I think the more we need to think of diversity of thought and deliver our messages in a variety of different ways that will hit those different targets. So that's a long answer to, I hope that was helpful, but I think it's not either or, but it's multiple modalities of communicating that will help your message land.
Yeah. Todd, I have a question.
Yeah.
Again, looking at the pros and cons, I think we have to see both sides of the coin. And to the point about if we visualize everything, do you envision sort of the end of the book, as it were? I mean, you still wrote a book about visual, right? So what is it should we expect down that road? Like, we are going to replace everything with videos and visualizations because it's easier to communicate. You know, we're going to shave off some of the complexity that comes from reading a book.
Yeah.
You know, so what, because I do see there's a little bit of an oxymoron here. It's all about leadership, and here's my book. Go to Amazon and read it.
Yeah. Well, I think it's not, you know, in this age of AI, machine learning, artificial intelligence, you know, everything around everything being digitized, right? We're still people and we're still human. There's something tactile and physical about opening this up. So I like making margin notes, as I wrote about. I never fold the corner of a page down. That goes against everything I believe in. But I like making notes and circles. All my books are filled with that. You can't do that. You can't autograph someone's Kindle, right? As far as I know, maybe there's some digital way of doing it, right? So I think as humans, as people, I think some things, because they were talking about, you know, digital, you know, books going the way of CDs, right? We're all on streaming. We're listening to Spotify and things now. But I think, you know, putting on my futurist hat, I think there's something, a human need that is fulfilled. We can't look at screens 24 hours a day. So I think there's something about holding a book. Now, again, that might change with the next generation or 50 years from now. I don't know. But I think right now, at this point in time, you know, people still, they're given the choice of buying the Kindle and buying the book. And it's like 80-20 in terms of people buying the book versus the Kindle version. So again, same thing with online teaching versus, and we could have a whole conversation just about that, right? Are we going to be all teaching virtually on Zoom, or is there still a need for in-person instructor-led training where we're all gathered in the same place at the same time for meetings, for classes? So I think it's not an either or. I think it's just a both. I think it's both. And we'll see what the future holds. You know, but again, we're still humans, and until we're fully robotic and we have no humanity left in us, we're still trying to put the humanity back in human resources and the human capital management program. So I think as long as we're people, there's some things that are going to stay this way for at least a while.
Yeah, and this is why we were trying to figure out how we do virtual book signing, right?
Yeah.
Because that's, so Todd, as I'm still waiting for other questions to arrive, you know, the title for your talk was how we can improve through these visualizations, both teaching, you talk extensively about it, and you're a very effective teacher. Then management, it came up, how that could be effective. And then there is this third one that everyone is holding their breath to find out, how can we improve our lives through visual leadership and thinking?
Yeah. We already do in a lot of ways. Like if you wake up in the morning and you picture your day, right? How's this day going to go? What am I going to wear? What am I going to eat? How am I going to get to work? Now we're all working from home, so 90% of those questions don't really apply anymore. I'm really literally going to start my day by checking my phone while I'm still in bed, right? So, but if you envision, you know, just the word envision, to picture in your head, how's my day going to go? how are people going to respond? I need to talk to my child about this or my spouse about this, right? We're picturing in our mind's eye, how are they going to react? How are they going to respond? It's almost like we're watching a movie in our mind, right? If you reflect back on how your day went or the vacation you had or think, so it's past, present, and future, right? If you reflect back on the past, you're visualizing almost like as if you're watching a movie, what something looked like. If you envision your day, or if you dream or plan or hope for the future, you're using visualization, right? All of the tools, tips, and techniques in my book, some of the models are meant intentionally, not just for work and for school, but also for real life. As you think about one model, for example, is my passion skill matrix, right? Which has two axes. One is, it goes from I love it to I hate it. Oh, I'm sorry, from I hate it to I love it, and from I'm not good at to I'm great at it. So if you picture a 4-box matrix, in that upper right corner is your sweet spot when you're doing things that you love and you have a passion for and you're good at, right? The upper left is your growth zone. That's where you have an interest in something, but you're not great at it yet. Your default zone is I am good at it, but I don't love it. And your failure zone is I don't like it and I hate it. So if you just visualize, that could be at work, but it also could be in your life, right? It could be aspects of your life that you're not happy with. If you're spending 80% of your time above that line, you're more happy and engaged. Below that line, you're not. So right there, you could use that for your job, but you could also use that for your life. And then you could say, what changes can I make in my life, whether it's hobbies or self-care or whatever, that will help me be happier and more engaged with what I'm doing. So that's just one example of how I use that in my class, with my clients, and also with real life.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from Beverly. She is teaching at NYU starting in September, and we actually did say that you're going to be a phenomenal mentor for anyone coming in, both from the NYU perspective. Yes. So her question is very practical because it was so compelling to see how you could be a great teacher with the visuals. What are your favorite sources of visuals? How do you find your visuals? What's your process?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people, when you're doing what you're not supposed to be doing, just pull images off Google. That's a no-no, right? But I use iStock Photo. I use Shutterstock. There's a whole bunch of subscription services where you could pay a minimal amount. Either you could buy images. It's always more expensive if you buy images individually. So it's like for my book, when I needed all these images, I literally did a 1-month subscription and I paid for and downloaded like the 50 or 60 images that I needed. So you want to do it legit. A lot of times you need to give credit, sometimes you don't. So I said, images are out there. If you could use your own pictures, I'm always looking for pictures. I was talking to someone the other day, he does a podcast in London, and he's gonna be interviewing me in the coming weeks. He was talking about how he was picked on and bullied in school, and he thought if I could get on a sports team, I'd be a cooler kid. So he basically, even though he grew up in a poor neighborhood and had no money, basically found an old basketball rim and just nailed it up to a brick wall, and it's still there like 10 years later, and he walks by it all the time. So he lives in a nicer neighborhood, nicer place, but he passes that old house. I said, take a picture of that. I would love to see it. And that's a visual image that captures where you were and how far you've come, and that story he tells about how when he joined the basketball team, he was no longer ostracized and picked on anymore because now he was one of the cool kids. So just that one story. So I said, if you take a picture of that basketball rim and hang it up in your office, that'll be a lifelong reminder of where you came from and how that one thing transformed your life. So think about that. What are some of the visual icons and images? So take pictures. We all have a camera with us all the time. It's so easy to just take out your iPhone. I'm always looking for pictures and images that I could take that I could weave into my presentations. And it's more meaningful when you're the picture taker than when you use someone else's image. So that's what I would say. So the images are all around us, hiding in plain sight. We just need to be more visually aware of them and then capture them and then use them in effective ways. And a lot of times our students know more than we do, right? So
totally.
One of my formula for success in my class, I say this in session 1, it's 1/3 my facilitation, 1/3 the content that I chose to incorporate, and 1/3 on the contributions of the students. And if we don't fulfill all 3 of those thirds, we're gonna not get 100% of the value of that experience. So anytime a student doesn't contribute, I tell them, you don't have to have an answer, you can have a question, right? Your question can spark a whole new way of thinking, or question, or change the direction of a conversation. So they don't have to have the answers, they just have to contribute in any ways that they can. So that formula really resonates with them because they feel like they want to get 100% of the value, and they should be learning from each other. And I say, if I didn't learn something at the end of the night, it's my fault because I didn't pull it out of you. Exactly. So talk about not just storytelling, leadership storytelling, but leadership story listening, right? Can we pull other people's stories out of them? That's part of our job from a leadership perspective.
And that can definitely change, especially in the classroom, and that can create a magic. I just want to share my own story and see your reaction, and then we'll close. When I was in the business school, You know, I absolutely dreaded accounting. I had to take an accounting class and finance. And when my accounting professor walked into the class and had started sharing his own story, and he said, accounting is like Louvre to me. You know, it just struck me. And from that time on, that was my very favorite class, because that's in some ways answering Peter's question here, because Peter is saying, how can you even teach accounting, statistics, finance using visualizations? I actually was a beneficiary of this type of teaching. And even for a non-linear person, you know, it was amazingly impactful. So we are about
just one thought on that. I was not a math person. I was a words and literature person. My father taught me math by teaching me to how to calculate baseball batting averages and earn run averages, right? So he's found something that I was interested in, translated that. So then I was engaged and interested, right? So that's where once you could figure out a batting average, you could calculate other percentages, right? So find what resonates with your students. And again, there needs to be meaning there. But that's, as you were talking, that just came back to me. It's like, that's how I learned how to do math. My father was an IRS agent, by the way. So, so he was an accountant and a math person. But yeah, we learned.
But you know, here you just solved the problem for this whole country of why our students are not strong in STEM subjects. And I've heard a researcher who looked at how math is being taught in schools. And the bottom line was that it was taught the wrong way. It was not really accessible to the majority of children. And if we change the way we teach these types of disciplines, we can transform the world, right? A very, very impactful communication. Thank you so much.